he just went low. He's in his hand. He's in his hand. He's open. His head wide open. Cracked open in the face.
Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Mario 100 back here with another episode of How's My Team. So we're going to go over a couple of weeks worth of stuff here. Obviously, we got the Titans, obviously, have the bye this week. The Giants will be playing, obviously, in the top end in Alice Springs against Melbourne, playing them this week. The Titans will play the Broncos next week at Suncorp. Obviously, they're off on the bye when I'm recording this week, and the Giants will be off next week. So that's why I'm doing a double header for these couple of weeks, just to record a whole bunch of stuff all together. That way I'm not splitting episodes up, and that way at least I've got a lengthy episode talking about a decent amount of stuff rather than, a episode that might last 15-20 minutes and talking about basically nothing. But yeah, we'll talk about the Titans obviously next week. We'll record that. Obviously it'll be part of this video, but obviously we'll talk about that next week when we're recording. Obviously recording this on Sunday morning. But Giants will play today, and then we'll obviously go over some miscellaneous stuff as well. The Champions League final, we'll go over the Conference League final as well. Obviously the Champions League final, PSG versus Arsenal. The Conference League obviously is involving Crystal Palace. That was earlier this week. We'll talk about that in a moment. And we've got a few big notable things to talk about, obviously, in terms of other results. The Cubs as well, obviously going to Pittsburgh to play a 4-game series there, playing 3 games in St. Louis, before obviously going back home and away with a whole bunch of different series in the next couple of weeks. But we'll talk about all of that on this episode of How's My Team. Obviously, we'll talk about my teams first in the way that this video will go. In terms of recording, won't be, because I've got a few things to talk about, obviously, the Champions League final and all that. But let's get started with the episode. And now, obviously, this will be the first part of the video proper. We talk about the Giants going up against Melbourne in Alice Springs, so in the Northern Territory, up in the tropics. A few players back for this game. Sam Taylor was one of those. Obviously, big notable player to come back into the side. We also had Lachie Whitfield. Obviously, he had hamstring awareness, maybe tightness last week, so obviously he was a late out for the game against the Lions. He was back, and Iraola was back for his first game back since he was injured as well, in a backup role in the ruck. And obviously Melbourne, they've had their struggles in Alice Springs before and in top end, and they continued. It was a 49 point win to the GWS Giants, 119-70, 19 goals 5 to 9 goals and 16 behinds for Melbourne. And of course, Melbourne, when it comes to that accuracy in front of goal, not ideal for them, and that's partially why the margin was out to 49 points at the end of it all. And realistically, they didn't really get in front at all during the game, except for in the first quarter, and possibly some in the second, but like very early in the second quarter. But yeah, that was about it. That was the only strike that they had in front of the game. Obviously, probably a few rush behinds in that score, in the 16 behinds, but for the Giants, it was 4 goals and no behinds in the first quarter compared to 3 goals and 4 behinds for Melbourne, so not an ideal start for them. Obviously 7 scoring shots to 4, and being very inaccurate in front of goal and being behind by 2 points at the start of the game. Then obviously the Giants scored 5 goals 2 in the second quarter compared to 3 goals and 4 behinds again in the second for Melbourne, which made it a 12-point margin at halftime. I was a bit nervous. I was keeping up with the score at work because obviously was working at the time this game was playing. And I was like, this is not an ideal situation to be in. Obviously, I was talking to somebody while I was working, just quickly messaging them when I could. And like 12 points is not a lot of points. Then they had a 5-goal, 1 behind spree in the third quarter. The Giants compared to 2 goals and 4 behinds for Melbourne. So Melbourne were pretty much behind the 8 ball. In fact, actually, I think Melbourne kicked 3 goals late. Or 2 goals late, almost got a third, ended up being a behind in that. Otherwise, they would have had some momentum back. And then the Giants ended up scoring 5 goals and 2 behinds in the last quarter, compared to 1 goal and 4 behinds for Melbourne. So that they really put a stamp on at the end of the game to make it a 49-point win, which obviously another big win, just under 50 points. It did go over 50 points a couple of times during the game in the last quarter as well. We'll talk about disposal efficiency, 80.4% to the Giants, 71.1% to the Demons. Efficiency inside 50, 54.3% for the Giants, 40.3% for Melbourne, so not ideal in terms of Melbourne's situation there. Contested marks, 11 to 6 in Melbourne's favour. Turnovers 70 to 66, so it's pretty even in terms of the turnover rate there. Clearances were in Melbourne's favour. Stoppage clearances were just in the Giants' favour. 3 kicks, it was 21 to 18, so pretty even in terms of that. Inside 50 is 62 to Melbourne, 46 to the Giants. But in terms of player stats, we'll go over the goals for the Giants as well. If I can press the button. Top scorers was Callum Brown, scored 3 goals, no behinds. Toby Green, basically top scored for the team. I don't know why he isn't on the top, but I guess it's because he's maybe inaccurate, I don't know. 3 goals 2 in terms of the game. Max Grueski also got 3 goals as well, so great for him. Toby Bedford got 2, Finn Callahan got 2, and Harry Thomas got 2, and Kieran Briggs, Aaron Cadman, Phoenix Goddard, and Jake Stringer all got 1 apiece. Stephen Cornelio was out. In fact, actually, my friend told me why he was out, so I'll bring that message up. Let me have a look at that. We'll say that Sam Taylor had a pretty bad in the game. Had a couple of cramps, one in his shoulder and a couple in his leg. But again, playing in the top end as your first game back, especially if you don't know what the weather's like. Alice Springs is just around near the tropics. So it's very, very, very warm there, especially in the Northern Territory, especially if you're going up towards, and that's why playing like the Cowboys for the Titans, the North Queensland Cowboys, any team that really goes up there that's not used to really, really hot weather, it's always a bugger up there to play, and playing in Darwin is the same, especially during the dry season. Which usually the season is around that time for football in terms of the NRL and the AFL. And obviously, playing in Alice Springs, it's very warm in the centre of Australia. I haven't went there myself, but I hear that obviously it is the tropics kind of affected as well. So it's very warm there. So obviously being very warm, and obviously first game back from a decent injury, you're going to get cramps. Stephen Cornelio was out at halftime due to hamstring awareness as well, so he was out for half the game there. But again, I think it was just precautionary, just to make sure that he was okay. But yeah, Jake Stringer got one goal one. Phoenix got 1-2. But yeah, it was very, very accurate in front of goal. Obviously, 5 behinds from 24 scoring shots compared to 25 scoring shots for the Demons, but only 9 goals in that. So you'd see why scoring a whole lot of behinds can sometimes not win your games. Obviously, we'll go over the table now, but again, it's not going to really matter, just due to the fact that obviously this episode goes up next week, not this week. So the ladder will change because obviously we are on the bye next week. So the Giants won't be getting any points next week. Obviously, we'll head back to Melbourne the week after. So just before this episode goes up, the week of this episode on Sunday, we'll be playing against St Kilda in that game before going to NG Stadium to play Carlton on the Saturday the week after that. So, which I will be actually going to that game because I have got my membership sorted. So that'll be the first game that I'll be going to all year, and hopefully it will be a good fixture. And they have like a first year members thing again. Ultimately, I think my dad's going to call in just to check if we can go, because obviously we got the email for it, and hopefully we can go to Giants HQ, get another tour again, possibly see some of the players, have a good time before the game, chill out, have a kick out, do all that, and then obviously go to the game, which that game for the Giants is a 4:15 game on Saturday, but again, we'll work out how to come back. Oh, and then the game after that, very, very, very interesting game. It's the Hawks at the MCG. So on the Friday night, that week, and then playing the Dockers after that as well as we start July. So in Canberra, so that's going to be very interesting before obviously the Cats come back at NG Stadium. So I should be ready to go, possibly watching that game as well. We'll see. We'll see what happens when it comes to that. Obviously, I got to work out which games I got to go to, because I think I've only got 2 or 3 games to go to all year. Obviously, going to the Carlton game, I got to work out whether I want to go to the Cats game, whether I want to go to obviously the Sydney Derby, which is in a couple of weeks after that, and then obviously whether I want to see them play the West Coast Eagles, which most likely I will be watching that game as well. So I'll be either watching the Cats or watching against Sydney, possibly the Sydney Derby, but we'll work it out when we get there. But obviously, big percentage booster. Our percentage is now 103.2% in terms of that. So we've gone over 100% again for the first time since opening round, I believe. Was the last time that we had that percentage up that high, so if not higher. So fantastic to get a swing back, especially after some terrible results against obviously the Bulldogs rather. I guess the Bombers game, because we didn't win by a lot. Obviously the loss against West Coast, which kind of hampered it a little bit, and then obviously the loss against Collingwood a few weeks back. So with the table as it is right now, Fremantle are still on top, 4 points clear of Sydney Swans. Sydney obviously played against Richmond, so they got a big percentage booster. They're up quite a bit of percent, over 152.4% compared to 135.2 for Fremantle. So Fremantle do lose and Sydney do win. They'll jump back up again. But again, Sydney have put a shellacking and put a 100-point margin on both Richmond and West Coast this year, so it's not really a surprise that the percentage is so high, and it's the highest of the competition because, well, that's how it is right now. Third position is Hawthorn at 34 points. Fourth is Geelong with 32 after the loss to Carlton back on Friday night, which was fantastic. Was really enjoying that. Gold Coast Suns had the bye, so they're on 28 points. There was a few teams that had the bye. They had the bye. Port Adelaide had the bye. North Melbourne, I believe, was also another one. And Adelaide, I think, was the other one from memory. So there's a few bye rounds obviously around. Obviously the Giants this week coming when recording this, obviously I'm recording this on Monday, this weekend, they'll have the bye. So there'll be a few teams that'll be out this week. Melbourne are in 6th position, also on 28 points, just percentage between the Gold Coast Suns, the Melbourne, and the Western Bulldogs, obviously with their win over Collingwood. And side note, thank you to the Bulldogs, because obviously we'll get to why in a second, but they're on 28 points as well. It's obviously just because they've been battered, with their percentage being 93.7%. 8th position is the Adelaide Crows on 24. Also on 24 is the Brisbane Lions. Percentage, obviously counting that out. And obviously in 10th position is the Giants. So the Giants are in the wildcard spot, last wildcard spot. And that's why I say thank you to the Bulldogs, because if Collingwood ended up winning, they would have been up to 26 points and would have pushed a lot of teams out. I guess we would have probably still gotten in terms of a wildcard spot. It just obviously would have been where we are, but I think I prefer the fact that Collingwood are in 11th position on 22 points now, so they're outside of the wildcard spot compared to being in, because I'd rather the Bulldogs be in than the Giants, though in saying that if the competition finished today, like the regular season finished today, we'd be playing the Western Bulldogs, I believe is how that works. So yeah, it would be an interesting game, especially considering it would be in Melbourne at Marvel Stadium if the season was to finish today, obviously. But yeah, Collingwood in 11th, St Kilda in 12th position. They're kind of sliding a little bit now. They're not really getting too many wins. They've only got 5 wins on the year, and at this point, their coach, obviously in Ross Lyon, is probably under a little bit of pressure right now. He's probably the next coach that's on the pressure cooker, because there's a few coaches that have been in the firing line. But St Kilda on 20 points. North Melbourne, obviously with the bye, are also on 20 points in 13th position. Carlton obviously got a win against, as I said, Geelong. Very, very close win. Jump up to 14th position, jump out of the bottom 4 to get to 16 points. And obviously the percentage is keeping the West Coast Eagles out, because they also got a win. They got a win over Essendon after obviously Essendon sacking Brad Scott over the start of the week. So unfortunately for them, Lightning couldn't strike in the fact that they could get another win on the board. But again, West Coast were playing relatively well at home and won pretty convincingly over Essendon, 16 points to their name as well, which means that Port Adelaide with the bye drop into the bottom 4 with 12 points to 16th position. With obviously Carlton and West Coast getting a win this week, obviously it shook up the table a little bit. And in fact, actually, that's probably the biggest shake-up of the weekend, I think, out of the teams that were playing over the weekend. Because Port Adelaide were outside. I think we're in 14th position going into this weekend. And then obviously just dropped down into the bottom 4. Richmond obviously got belted by Sydney, but they're in 17th position, obviously with 8 points, and Essendon on the bottom still with 1 win to their name with 4 points and 70.5% in percentage. So not ideal for them. And of course, their next game is against Carlton. Obviously, Carlton are playing relatively well. There's quite a few big games coming up, but obviously for the Giants, we have the week off this coming week. Obviously, when this episode will go up, that weekend we'll obviously be playing the Saints in Melbourne at Marvel Stadium in a revenge game, obviously for the 2-point loss that we had earlier this season at home against them. 4-point loss rather at NG. So hopefully we can put some more pressure on St Kilda, and I guess we'll get like the best out of St Kilda, because we usually do in terms of games. We don't usually dominate St Kilda on the pitch. It's not very often during games that we do belt them by like 40 plus points. That usually doesn't happen. Like, we might get like a 30 plus point win sometimes, but it's not very often that that's happened. But we get the best out of each other, and I think that's going to be great. So playing St Kilda obviously the week after, obviously the bye heading into this weekend. It'd be very interesting to see where the Giants end up. Obviously they'll probably drop out of the wildcard spot, obviously with the bye in effect. In fact, let me have a look, because I'll have a look in terms of what the who is on the bye this week coming up, because I know obviously the Giants is one of them. Go to round 13, and obviously this weekend obviously is there'll be the long weekend, so obviously they'll have Big Freeze 12 on the Monday of the King's birthday weekend. So obviously there will be a game on Monday, which is obviously Collingwood and Melbourne. The Giants and Richmond both have the bye this week, so there'll be a few teams on the bye next week. Sydney obviously will be one of them. I would imagine Fremantle will be another. There's a few in the next couple of weeks. I'd say round 14 obviously is when St Kilda play us. It'll be Collingwood, Carlton, Hawthorn and the Dockers, and then obviously the week after in around 15, I think it's the last of the bye rounds. Be Melbourne, Essendon, Sydney and West Coast. Just go to round 16 just to make sure. Round 16 it'll be Western Bulldogs, Geelong, St Kilda and Melbourne. So round 16 might actually be the last of the bye rounds before everyone is back to full swing. Yeah. So obviously round 12 is just done. But round 16 will be the last of the bye rounds, so hopefully we can pick up some points on the way past. Obviously we get Hawthorn the week after they have the bye, so not ideal in that regard. And I do believe we get Carlton as well after their bye. Yes, we do. Very interesting to see that's how that's fallen in terms of the bye rounds, but hopefully we can pick up some wins in the next couple of weeks, obviously against the Saints, against the Blues at home as well, because we've got some big fixtures coming up, like that Hawthorn game coming up towards the end of June. But obviously 49-point win over the Demons in Alice Springs, and obviously the woes in the top end for Melbourne continue, and another big win and percentage boosting win for the Giants. Alright, it's finally the Sunday before this episode goes up, which means that it's the Titans. It's the second part of the actual teams that I do actually go for in the main part of it. Obviously we talk about the Cubs more so in the miscellaneous stuff, but obviously we cover mostly the Titans, the Giants, Liverpool, the Wanderers, usually in the main segments, and we're going to do that finally again. It feels like forever. I've been recording this episode since it's over the last 2 weeks, and it feels like it's taken a while to get here. But obviously, big derby after the second bye for the Titans this year, and obviously it was against the Broncos. So it was obviously the big one of the 3 derbies that we play against Queensland teams. Obviously against the Cowboys is obviously the next one down, and then obviously the Dolphins, considering obviously they're a newer expansion side. Added into the competition, they're obviously in the bottom position, but that's in terms of obviously the experience that we've had. Obviously Brisbane is probably the big one, because obviously we're so close to each other in terms of the Gold Coast and Brisbane. It's only like maybe less than 50 kilometres between the two hubs, so it's about probably 30-40 miles between both. If you're in America, I don't know why I'm stumbling on my words there. But if you're in America, yeah. So it's not far away, but it's not like it's 5 minutes down the road per se. Especially when it comes to travel, a lot of people traveling to Suncorp, where this game was actually being played. Obviously, a lot of people from the Gold Coast travelling down usually take public transport because it's obviously closer, and it takes less time than probably driving, especially when you're trying to find a park at the ground, which I hear is awful to do when it comes to Suncorp. I've never went to Suncorp myself. It's one of the big grounds, obviously, all around the country in terms of playing rugby league that I haven't gone to. It's one that is on the bucket list, at least at some stage, to watch a game there. Obviously, got to get to Queensland again for the first time in well over a decade, and almost a decade and a half, actually. It's been that long. But anyway, speaking on it, obviously, big derby, Broncos, Titans. Obviously, the Titans looking down the barrel of 7 losses in a row, and the Broncos obviously, I think actually it was 7 losses in a row, and the Broncos staring down the barrel of 5 losses in a row. And it was the Titans that actually got up. They got a win finally, and their 3rd win of the campaign, I believe. 28 points to 23, and it got really, really, really close in terms of the margin and in terms of the entire game. In fact, it was quite a seesaw of a game, to be honest, when it comes down to it. Obviously, in terms of points, with the game and how it's structured, it was very competitive for both teams, especially in the first half. There was a couple of opportunities, obviously, for the Broncos. There was a couple chances that went begging for the Titans early on, but they did score. The Broncos did score through Piakura in the 19th minute. It was converted to make it 6-0. Then Katoni Staggs ended up going down the sideline, almost stepped out, but did obviously plant the try, and was converted again by Adam Reynolds to make it 12 points to 0 at the end of the 23rd minute. Then Curtis Moran on a lucky try, I will say, because obviously the ball got dropped somehow in the exchange. Curtis Moran ended up picking up a try in the 29th minute. It was converted by Jaden Campbell 2 minutes later. Obviously, it went up to the bunker to check it just to make sure there was no knock-ons or anything. And then Philip Sami got a break in the 37th minute and ended up beating Reece Walsh. Reece Walsh, it looked like as if he was carrying an injury into this game. I don't know whether he was or not, but his effort in terms of tackling Philip Sami on the run, just not there. And that's especially if it's somebody that you're putting in the Queensland side for game 2, especially, which is a must-win game for Queensland. You'd be looking at that at Reece Walsh and be like, ooh, do we put Reece Walsh in at fullback, or do we keep him on the bench, or do we put him in the side in general when a tackle like that could happen? And someone from the Blues side could get a break, and especially if he was in the fullback role, would he be able to tackle, say, like Ethan Strange did in game 1, or someone like Bradman Best, for example, that is a speedster in the centres or the wing that could beat Reece Walsh and beat him around? Would he be able to make that tackle? And that's something that obviously Billy Slater will be looking at, obviously, as the coach of the Queensland Maroons, especially obviously considering this game in Melbourne is a must-win for them, otherwise the series is lost. And obviously we'll go to Queensland for game 3 after that, but and obviously try to avoid a sweep if they do end up losing, but they want to keep the Shield in Queensland, so you got to pretty much weigh up all of your options. And so it wasn't a great effort. Jaden Campbell did miss the kick though, so it ended up going to 12 points to 10 at half time. And then the Titans just went out firing. Jaden Campbell scored a double in the 48th and 53rd minute. Obviously converted converted the first try of the 2. I can't read. He's converted both. Considering that the conversions is 4 out of 5, it's kind of put it in a list, and it's it doesn't say, oh yeah, this one was missed from the second try, so it's a bit weird. But yeah, he converted both of his tries. The second one was fantastic. Obviously, the first one was on a break from AJ Brimson, got passed to Jaden Campbell, and Jaden Campbell just some foot. absolute magic with his feet, in and around. Obviously, AJ did play to try and get the pass back, but obviously was kind of used as a decoy. I don't know whether that went to plan or not, but obviously dancing around on his feet, just like his dad, very much like his dad. His dad used to do that a lot at fullback as well. So, it's just picking up some of the great techniques from the great Preston Campbell. So it ended up being 22 points to 12, obviously with the conversions. Then after that, Jesse Arthurs ended up scoring a try. They missed the kick on that one, which made it a 6-point game, 22 points to 16. And then Grant Anderson got a lovely pass, I will admit, that could have been dropped relatively on how close it was. In the 66th minute, he scored, and Adam Reynolds kicked the conversion to tie it up at 22. At the 72nd minute, Adam Reynolds ended up kicking a field goal, one-point field goal, basically right in front. Especially with it being a slow play the ball as well, and I think it was close to last tackle. The effort from the Titans to try and get a situation on the kick was pretty poor in terms of that, especially like I said, as I said, it was a slow play the ball, so I don't know how they weren't set, obviously, to run the line, but obviously Adam Reynolds did kick the field goal, which put them ahead by one. I was like, oh God, here we go. The Titans have bottled a game here with like about 5-6 minutes left. They've held them out for quite a lot, and the defense was really, really good in this game, I will say, from especially the Titans. The Broncos obviously have a decent defense in their own right, and obviously they won the premiership last year, so their defense had to be really good last year, which it was. But obviously they're in a similar situation as they were last year, this year. And then obviously won so many games in a row, won quite a few on the trot, and ended up winning the premiership as well. But it's one of those things where it felt like we're up by 10, then obviously back to 6, and I was like, oh boy, here we go, we're gonna lose the game. Then out of pure desperation, obviously, but some pure brilliance from Keanu Kinney, puts in a chip kick, completely goes over the line. Obviously, Reece Walsh is running one way, he's running at full speed the other way, and somehow ends up with the ball, ends up scoring the winning try in the 76th minute. Jaden Campbell converts it in the 77th, and then obviously there was some good play, obviously, from the Dragons, from the Broncos, in terms of getting line dropout. Ezra Mam kind of bottled it in himself, and someone actually in saying that one team or one person actually did bottle it. If Ezra Mam went to hands on the right side, I think the Titans were shot on the right side, and obviously they'll show that in terms of the Broncos in terms of training, and obviously watching footage back to control the situation. You got to look up, especially considering that yes, it was a break on the left side. A lot of the Titans were shot on the right side, on our right side, on the Brisbane's right side, and our left side defense. It was not great at all, and should have went that way. He went the short side, did the kick, and obviously Keanu Kinney ended up putting over the in goal line, over the dead ball line, for what would have been a dropout, but obviously with it being a 40-second time, like a clock for the dropouts, with the amount of time that we had left, it obviously ended the game at that point, so make it 28 points to 23, the final score. And what a fantastic win for the Titans. Obviously, like I said, it was one of those games that really was up in the air in terms of what they were going to do and if they were going to win the game in particular. Obviously, in terms of our season, obviously it's the third win of the season and our first win in like 6 games. In fact, actually, yeah, I will scroll back past the bye. Obviously, the last month was terrible. Obviously, we got beaten. Yeah, it would have been, and so 5 losses in a row, including obviously the game against the Warriors, which obviously we had that huge comeback. It just feels weird that it's 5 losses in a row when we've had the 2 byes in between. Obviously, the Warriors game and then obviously the Seagulls game from last week. But we've been in and around the mix, and it's something that I will say has been the case a lot over the last few years. Is that and especially the last few games. Obviously, the Seagulls is one of them. Obviously, the Warriors. Obviously, they kind of switched off, but kind of got close in that game. And relatively against the Broncos in the first game, like obviously they had a decent amount of stars still in that side, and obviously they did have a few out as well this week. Obviously, Pat Carrigan was out this week as well. I believe it might have been a meniscus tear or something like that. It was an injury of some sort. And then there was another player that was out as well in this game. And actually, Ezra Mann was, on the bench. And, I think he was on the bench entirely. Don't think it was 18th man. No, he wasn't. Yeah, he was on the bench. But it's one of those things, unless somebody went injured, I can't remember. But he ended up being left out on the main side. Obviously, Ezra Mann. Obviously, Payne Haas ended up coming back this week, so that was a big in for them. But obviously the Broncos aren't at full strength. But we'll take any of the wins that we can get. Obviously, you've got to play with the players that you've got, and obviously beating the Broncos at Suncorp is no easy feat from a lot of teams. In saying that, obviously the Dragons did that last week, but so at the moment, in terms of recording right now, we've moved up to 14th, but again, that's not until the game on Monday, which obviously we will record on Tuesday. We'll record the last part of that in the miscellaneous stuff, because we'll talk about the Titans obviously with their table eventually towards the end of the video, because obviously the Bulldogs and the Eels play on Monday, because obviously it's King's birthday, public holiday for Australia. Obviously it's not actually the Royal Monarch's birthday. Obviously it used to be Queen Elizabeth's birthday, the Queen's birthday. It's usually the first or the second Monday in June was a public holiday for that. And yeah, we have some big games. Obviously, one of the games is played on that Monday, especially in the AFL. Obviously, it's the traditional clash between Collingwood and Melbourne. Obviously, that's the big freeze. We'll eventually talk about that as well. But obviously, the Eels play the Bulldogs on that King's birthday Monday. So we will talk about obviously the table when we get to that. But at the moment, the Titans have jumped both the Bulldogs and the Eels with the win to jump into 14th position. Obviously 2 points behind the Raiders, who obviously got a win not this week. Obviously they got buried by the Roosters. In fact, they actually held to 0, which was crazy. But they obviously got the win the week before in Canberra when they weren't expected to. And obviously for the Broncos, they sit in 12th position still, also on 12 points, just in front of the Raiders. But their for and against is a lot better than the Raiders right now. Obviously with the Raiders going down against the Roosters pretty heavily this week. But yeah, so ultimately the Titans are sitting in 14th position. Obviously we'll talk about the table, obviously the miscellaneous stuff. But 28 points, 23 win for the Titans against the Broncos, against Big Brother. And obviously heading down to Sydney on Sunday coming to play against the Tigers, which obviously the Tigers are in around 10th position. I think they play today anyway, and I will check that. Yes, they play the Panthers at CommBank, so that could be a game where they do pick up a win, they go up, but ultimately the Panthers are playing some really good footy, so who knows at this point. But it is one of those things. And then obviously the Sharks versus the Dragons is the last game of today, the 4 o'clock slot. And then obviously the 4 o'clock slot on Monday is obviously the Bulldogs and the Eels at Accor. So, some big games coming up, but obviously we've got the Tigers, and then after that at home, we've got a double header week to week. Obviously on the Saturday, the week after, we've got the Panthers at home on the 20th, and that's the mid game of the week. So that's going to be a big game, and that's going to be a big Saturday for me because we'll talk about that eventually. But I think I'll be going to, obviously, the Carlton and Giants game at NG, so that's going to be a big day for me in terms of that. And then obviously we have the Bulldogs after that before we head into the bye, our last bye of the season, in round 18 before playing the Storm in Melbourne. So that's going to be very interesting. We've got quite a few games, obviously, after that last bye. We've got the Storm, the Seagulls at home at Seabus, then the Dragons away, which I think is, it's at Cogra. So maybe I might be able to go to that game just depending on what weekend that falls on, especially if I want to go to Cogra, but it's not necessarily the best ground to go to. Panthers by... I won't be on. I'll be on that weekend, so maybe not, but we'll see. Depends on how I feel. And then obviously at home against the Warriors, against the Cowboys in Newcastle, against Newcastle, and that's the 2:00 game. I think that weekend falls on a weekend that I am off, so I might like to go to Newcastle if I can get down there. And then obviously 3 games at home against the Sharks, the Rabbitohs and the Dolphins to finish off the season. So quite a few games coming up. There's obviously some games that we could possibly win in that slide, but a lot of those teams obviously are in and around the mix in terms of playing finals, especially obviously the Dolphins, the Rabbitohs, the Sharks, the Knights. Cowboys are in and around the mix. Warriors obviously in second position. The Dragons obviously out of the teams that are left is the lowest team, obviously, and that's the team that's obviously running last. But every other team is above us on the table, which I mean is not too much of a surprise. At this point, obviously the Bulldogs are not, but that's obviously going into that game that they've got in hand. But 28 points to 23, great win for the Titans, 3rd win of the season, and definitely need more of that. More effort as well, because a lot of effort will go a long way. So obviously this will be part of the miscellaneous stuff. In fact, we'll just say this is part of the first part of the miscellaneous stuff. We're going to talk about obviously the Champions League final. We're going to talk about that because obviously PSG and Arsenal, arguably one of the biggest games all season long, has come to a head. Obviously PSG obviously winning on their side of the draw. Arsenal obviously winning the Premier League, as we mentioned last week when I'm recording. It was last week. Obviously, when this episode goes up, it will be the week before last, because they technically won it before the last week of the regular season in the Premier League. I should say just the season in general in the Premier League when I'm talking about regular season. But obviously, over this morning, since it's a Sunday morning, Champions League final was played, and it was PSG obviously against Arsenal. Huge clash. It was going to be a situation where these teams ultimately the best of the best. Obviously PSG winning last season, winning it very convincingly in their final, and then obviously Arsenal, champions of England, trying to be champions of Europe for the first time in their history in terms of the club, because the club has never actually won one. And it was a pretty massive encounter after extra time. So this is 120 minutes of play, mind you. It was 1-1. So Arsenal scored in the first 6 minutes, and then off a penalty kick from a penalty spot in the 65th minute, PSG responded. It went all the way through. There was a few shots, a few calls that obviously did not get picked up by VAR, handballs, all that type of stuff in that, which again, for an Arsenal game, not really a surprise. But it went to penalties, and it was 4 penalties to 3 in PSG's favour. So PSG has gone back-to-back in terms of the Champions League, being back-to-back champions. Arsenal, despite not conceding that many goals all season long in terms of the group stage, and including even in the knockout stage as well in the finals. They lose out. They were undefeated until this game, and they lose again, very, very harshly to penalties. And I mean, it sucks to lose to penalties. I mean, I've played in like grand finals in terms of my local competitions before, and I think I've went to a grand final on 4 separate occasions, and 3 of those went to penalties, and I've only won 1 of 3 of those. So yeah, I know how hard it is to win, win a title from penalties, and I know the harshness of losing in penalties when you get so close to winning a title. And there was a crazy stat after that. I got this at 5:20 in the morning. I was up for the penalty shootout, and just like the last minute and a half, because I crashed asleep and then woke up around about a little bit after 4. I should say closer to 5. And the game was still playing. No club has played more European Cup / Champions League matches without winning the trophy than Arsenal, and they've played 226 games. So that means that, yes, PSG go back-to-back for the first time in their history. First team to go back-to-back since Real Madrid three-peated in 2016, 2017 and 2018, obviously with the old system in effect there. And obviously PSG add their logo to the wall again. Obviously Liverpool's in there, Aston Villa is in there, Nottingham Forest is in there, Chelsea's in there, Manchester United, they're also in there, Manchester City obviously in there as well. But yeah, no Arsenal again in that group, and it's pretty funny. I said it for weeks leading into this, and even into some of the previous games as well. And you even said this in the videos in the How's My Team episodes when we were talking about Champions League, obviously with talking about Arsenal, in that I wasn't confident on the fact that they were going in, despite, yes, being undefeated at that point in time, they weren't going in very convincingly into the Champions League final. Obviously, kind of going through the motions and only winning maybe 1-0, and especially in a double leg, they're only getting a draw in one of the games and then like one score in the other. Ultimately, I guess with PSG, I felt like PSG had the better team. Obviously, they blew Liverpool out of the blocks pretty much in both games, with so much possession as well, which I mean, I don't fault them for that, because obviously their team was really good last season when they beat us in the round of 16, and obviously in terms of their team, it's probably just as good, if not maybe slightly better this season as well, and we got beaten in the quarterfinals with that. So ultimately it is what it is. Liverpool, once again, lose to the champions of Europe. So that's pretty crazy. But Arsenal, that means that Arsenal only go from a quadruple to a treble to a double to only getting one trophy this season, being the Premier League trophy, which obviously the first time in 22 years that they've done that. But at the same time, will people say that they have been disappointing in the fact that they've only won one trophy like they did with Liverpool last season, because they've made it to 2 finals of the competitions, obviously in the Carabao Cup earlier this year, and obviously losing to Manchester City earlier in the season, and then obviously losing to PSG at the end of it all. And I don't know whether it was the hangover from obviously the Premier League win as well. That could play a factor in that as well. But again, it went to extra time, went all the way. So it's not really too much of an effort that went awry for Arsenal. It was in their hands a little bit. But again, that means that a team that has gone undefeated in the Champions League, in any stage of the Champions League, whether it be through all the group stage or like Liverpool did up until the last game of the group stage when they'd already cemented their spot in qualification for the final 16. They lose. They lose before the final or at the final. They don't go all the way to win it. So that's pretty funny. Actually, and speaking of that, obviously in terms of Liverpool, actually a few hours before that, I was actually at work when this actually broke. It was after I actually come home when I actually started posting about it. But Arne Slot was sacked by Liverpool. So we don't have a head coach right now in terms of a manager at the team. So that was a couple of hours before the Champions League final. I'm not really surprised on that. I'm surprised that obviously it come out now that it happened. Obviously, we missed out on Xabi Alonso. Obviously, he's gone to Chelsea to be the manager there from next season. So it's interesting that we missed him. Obviously, there's a few coaches out there that are notable that we could get. Obviously, Glasner is obviously another one because obviously, in speaking on him, obviously, in terms of the Conference League, Crystal Palace ended up winning 1-0 in there as well. So they ended up winning a European trophy, and Arsenal didn't actually win a European trophy. So it's funny because that means that Aston Villa won one and Crystal Palace won one, and Arsenal did not. And speaking on that, obviously he's available because obviously he's done with Crystal Palace. But Iraola, obviously, who was the coach for Bournemouth, obviously he was done. He said he was done before Bournemouth actually ended up getting into a situation, getting into the Europa League next season. So he's available as well. Lots of people have tipped him to be the next head coach / manager for Liverpool. I wouldn't be objecting to that. I think that he would be great in the role. Ultimately, he would need to prove himself because there is an issue of obviously managing a mid-table team, which obviously Bournemouth have been for before this season. Obviously, that's just gone. Has been the case before with Bournemouth and been up and down all over the place. Obviously, they did get relegated, obviously, into the Championship, come back a couple of years later, and have been around the mid-table and that sort of thing. Hopefully, he can prove himself. If you have some attacking football like Bournemouth did this season, next season for Liverpool, that'll be fantastic. We'll see that obviously after the World Cup is done, which probably won't be until August. We'll see obviously the Premier League start up again. But if obviously he is given the job, it'd be interesting to see how he commands with Champions League football, obviously with Liverpool, as well as obviously the other competitions as well, obviously the FA Cup, Carabao Cup when that eventually comes around, and obviously the Premier League as well. It'd be interesting to see if he does get the job at Liverpool, what happens, especially with now the fact that Slot is out, what's going to happen with transfers and that, because obviously Salah's gone, and Robertson's gone as well, and Konate is also gone as well from the club. He was gone, I think, at the start of this week, if not late last week. Yeah, that's 3 players are gone in the space of like a couple of weeks after Slot's gone. We've got to fill some of those roles. Obviously, we'll be getting like Harry Elliott back, obviously, but from Aston Villa. But we'll see what happens. Obviously, we had a few players that were injured, and obviously some more players as well, like Alexander Isak and all that type of stuff, coming back into the swing with another season under their belt as well, that obviously are signed to Liverpool. It'd be interesting to see what happens with this team, especially considering we don't have a head coach right now. But that came out a couple of hours before the Champions League final even got going, so that's crazy. In that, bit surprised that had happened, but ultimately I feel like it is the best for Liverpool to go forward, especially after this season and the way that it's been, in the fact that there was a lot of excuses in terms of losses, but ultimately just wasn't good enough. And ultimately, yes, he did give us a Premier League title, obviously our 20th in the club's history, and I appreciate that. Obviously, I'm not going to deny that, and I'm going to appreciate that a lot. A lot of that team was the leftover from Jurgen Klopp's last team in his last year in the Premier League with Liverpool. So I give a little bit of credit, obviously, to Arne Slot, because obviously you got to coach for a 38 game season. And he did that, obviously, in terms of going around with, obviously, getting to the Carabao Cup final, obviously against Newcastle, ended up losing that, but obviously got there, obviously got around, I think it was the quarterfinals, if not the semi-finals, in the FA Cup, if not, obviously the fourth or fifth round, and then obviously got to the round of 16, obviously with the Champions League in his first season with Liverpool as well. So it's one of those things. It is what it is, but obviously kind of losing faith in terms of the fans, and that's one of the big things is the fans, and obviously with the way that the statement from Salah that obviously felt like a stab in the heart, as some people notably said. Felt like some of the locker room and some of the players in the dressing room agreed with the fans that it wasn't up to snuff, that we needed to play better football, and the results didn't come, especially after 4-1 loss to Aston Villa, 3-2 loss to Man United. Obviously, Man United getting a double for the first time in a long time against Liverpool, but obviously 4-1 against Aston Villa a couple of weeks before the season's done, when Aston Villa didn't even need fourth position because they won the Europa League. I know you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, but again, Aston Villa ended up winning against Manchester City anyway, so it made their position even better, and they would have had a situation where they would have got fourth or fifth. They would have got Champions League football, despite the result against Liverpool. So I don't understand, but it is what it is. Yes, got fifth, but didn't win anything this season. We need a lot of things to go our way, and things didn't go our way this season. So Arne Slot is out, and at this point in time, we don't know who is the head coach / manager for Liverpool at this point, but obviously I'll mention that later in the episode if we do get confirmation in the next week or so. I'll add it as an addendum to the end of this episode if we do get any news on that. But so PSG winning 4 penalties to 3, 1-1 at the end of extra time and full time in regulation for PSG. Being champions of Europe again, back-to-back, for the first time in the club's history against Arsenal. Alright, and with this next segment of the miscellaneous segment, I've got to put this boy on. Yes, this is my New South Wales Blues cap. So we know we're going to talk about State of Origin. I didn't mention it at the top of the start of this episode, but I forgot that obviously State of Origin Game 1 in terms of the men was playing, as well as the third game of the series for the women. So we'll talk about both of those in this part of the segment. But we'll talk about the men's first, because the men's did play before the women. They played the day before. They played on Wednesday the 27th of May. Obviously, big series for both states. Obviously, Queensland winning the last 2 series 2-1, in pretty similar fashion when it comes to the series in general. Obviously, it's a 3-game series. For those of you that don't know, obviously, it's when it comes to State of Origin, a lot of players from New South Wales and Queensland will play each other in a 3-game series. They've been doing it since the 80s, and since 1980, I believe. It is for eligibility. Can't say that word. That word is difficult to say sometimes. For a particular state, obviously it's going back to your grassroots club. So obviously the club that you played in when you're starting to play grassroots football. If you played in New South Wales, you are eligible to play for the New South Wales Blues. And if you played for a Queensland team, obviously you're eligible to play for the Queensland Maroons. Obviously, the rules changed this season, obviously, in terms of international players. Before, players like, say, AJ Brimson, who had actually played for Queensland, the fact that he's now a England representative, he can still play for Queensland now, as with the rule as it was before. If you're talking about last season and many of the seasons before, you couldn't do so, especially if it was a tier 1, especially if you're playing New Zealand, for example, or England, like a tier 1, a tier 1 nation. So obviously Australia, New Zealand, England, I think at least those three were covering those. You couldn't play in State of Origin. There's a few players in both camps that are. Obviously AJ, if he does get into a situation where he's playing for Queensland, will be one of those players, just as an example. So obviously big series in New South Wales. The first game was at Accor Stadium. Obviously the third game will be in Queensland, and then the second game this season will be in Melbourne, and I believe from next year onwards, for the next 2 years at least, it's in New Zealand. I believe it's in Christchurch or Auckland. It's one of the two, but I remember seeing that, but I can't remember which one. But I think from 2027 and 28, the second game, at least one of the games during the State of Origin series will be played in New Zealand. So a great pickup for New Zealand. I think that ultimately having Origin out there, they'll love it, as they love watching the Wars over there. I feel like with a intense game as Origin can be, and hopefully it'll be very intense when it goes over there in New Zealand. It's going to be a great spectacle for them, and ultimately wouldn't be surprised at one stage if we do get a situation with PSG when their stadium obviously gets up and running, because obviously the Chiefs will be in the competition in 2028 if everything goes right. Obviously they've got a few signings, obviously. Start off with Luai Johnston is there as well, but we haven't heard from anybody else as of yet. But once their stadium is put up, I wouldn't be surprised in the next 4 or 5 years, maybe at least the next decade, there'll be at least one game probably of State of Origin in Papua New Guinea, because obviously they're nation's sport, nation's most popular sport up there. Getting the biggest game, wouldn't be surprised if we get a situation where PSG does get one, if the stadium holds quite a few fans up there. I think that would be great for them. But we'll talk about obviously the game. We'll get to that. Obviously a big game. And it was not a great first half, ideally, for the Blues. They went down 20 points to 0 by the time the 20th minute rolled around. Obviously they scored in the 9th minute through Robert Toya, in the 13th minute from Tom Flegler, and obviously the hammer, Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow, scored in the 16th minute as well, and then with a penalty kick as well, for, I believe it was a high shot. It might have been that or hip drop. It ended up being 20-0. We did get one back before halftime in the 26th minute from Hudson Young. Great pass from Nathan Cleary, especially with the fact that we had Mitch Moses out a couple of days before this game, so that put Ethan Strange in at 6. So obviously a debutant in a huge crucial role, very, very crucial role in the team. And speaking on Ethan Strange, he scored in the 67th minute. I will say he did score probably about 5 minutes beforehand, but it was sent up to the bunker, and the bunker said that there was an obstruction in there. I think that was 50-50. I think there was a situation where it could have been. Obviously, my allegiance is with the Blues, so I was like, nah, it's totally not. but I can see where they've seen where it was. I thought that he was on the inside shoulder. He might not have been in terms of the player running through. Yeah, but Ethan Strange did not get denied. He did score on the 67 minute off a fantastic break. He led the break on the left side. He passed the ball to Stephen Crichton. Crichton got into some space. Actually did well to run the line that he did, because he actually manipulated the defence of Queensland. Obviously, one person running behind him on his left side, and obviously the fullback in front of him at this point. And then he flicked past it back. Ethan Strange jumps over, obviously, the runner that was running behind Crichton, which ended up being Sam Walker, goes for the tackle down low on Stephen Crichton before the pass. And then we get a lovely shot of Ethan Strange just hopping over Sam Walker being on the ground and running about 10-15 metres to score. So he ended up scoring anyway. It didn't matter in that regard. Missed the conversion on that one, so it was a bit nervous there. But then Nathan Cleary put in a clinic, ended up scoring himself in the 71st minute and converting it, and then obviously put up a huge bomb, about a minute and a half left, and Hamasai Tabuai-Fidow was in the fullback role, and we'll get to why that is in a second. And James Tedesco jumps up, goes for the contest, ends up coming down with the ball, and scores a try on the last minute, basically. It says the 78th minute, but I'm pretty sure it slotted into the 79th minute, and ended up with a conversion with about 40 seconds left to make it 22 points to 20, a win for the Blues, and was the biggest comeback in Origin history from either side, from either Queensland or New South Wales in this game. So fantastic result for the Blues. We'll say there is a big asterisk on this, because ultimately they played like absolute shit for the first 20-25 minutes. There was at least 4 errors, and 3 of those obviously contributing to the tries that they did have in Queensland in the first half. I believe there was a few drop balls. Crichton dropped one at least. I think actually he dropped 2 during the game. And Brian Toto ended up dropping the ball 3 times. Put pressure on us entirely. Tedesco also ultimately dropped 1. There was a bomb try probably a couple of minutes before James Tedesco ended up scoring. That could have been a try if Tedesco ended up running it instead of passing the ball about 5-10 metres to his right to a forward. Felt like that was going to be bombed, and felt like we were going to lose the game there very nervously. But the big call of the entire game was Kalen Ponga being sent off for a high shot in the 57th minute. So direct contact with the shoulder was what the call was from. Ashley Klein, who was the referee being on the field with the referee. It went up to the bunker, obviously, considering it is a offensive to foul play. It's one of those things where it went up to the bunker. The bunker suggested that it should have been 10 minutes. And Ashley Klein believed that it should have been sent off, and it was called sent off. So in terms of that, there is a big asterisk on the fact that this is a win for the Blues, considering their first half was pretty abysmal, apart from obviously the try to Hudson Young. And towards the end of the first half, I feel like they kind of they were a bit nervous going out of the blocks for the first 20, 25, maybe even 30 minutes. But the last 10 minutes after Hudson Young scored in the 26th minute, we kind of got our rhythm a little bit after that. And definitely in the last 10 minutes of that first half, he could have scored at least once or twice. So credit to the defence for Queensland in the last 10 minutes of that first half, because that was really well done. But obviously, Kalen did collide with his head as well. There was 1 or 2 angles that did show that the shoulder did contact Kohler's head. Obviously, he was the winger on the right wing, I believe. The left wing, rather. Left wing. And yeah, it was a head clash, but there was obviously shoulder involved, so I can understand why it was called a send-off. Obviously, in terms of talking a couple of years ago with Joseph Sawali going straight off and being sent off in the first 5 minutes of the 2024 Origin Series in Game 1, both at Accor/ANZ for a similar shoulder charge tackle. Kalen didn't wrap his arms at all. He braced like this. So it did not help his case with that. Does get away with a fine, but the NRL have backed up Ashley Klein on the call as well. I feel like it should have been 10 minutes as well. I can understand why some people would have said that it was a send-off because, yes, he did make contact with the shoulder as well. But I feel like possibly it was shoulder first and then maybe head clash. But it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Obviously, yes, Robert with Kohler, he did go off with a Category 2, did not come back in the game. So we did end up getting an extra person on the bench for that. But it is a situation where that call completely flipped the game and flipped the game against the Maroons because obviously they were playing they were playing with 12 men for practically over a quarter of the game left to go at that point in time. So they got to play it like it is. And unfortunately, they did get into a situation where they did lose. But, yeah, not much you can do about that. Obviously, they can't really do anything about it now because the game is done, the result is done. All they can do is look forward to Game 2 and Game 3. Obviously, trying to win it in Game 2, obviously in Melbourne, to get it to a decider, which obviously will be at Suncorp for Game 3. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens in a couple of weeks' time with Origin Game 2. But obviously it's a 2-point win for the Blues over the Maroons in the men's series. So obviously the New South Wales Blues are up 1-0 in that series. And then we go to the women's. We'll go to the women's game now because obviously the Blues had won the series at this point. 11 points to 6 in the first game and 14 points to 10 in the second game. First game at McDonald Jones. Obviously, New South Wales hadn't won there before. They did in Game 1 and then won it in Suncorp as well. So it was 2-0 up. Obviously, another series win for the Blues, going for a 3-0 sweep for the first time for both the men's and women's competition since 2000, that a Blues team has gotten a 3-0 sweep. And they ended up doing it. They ended up doing it on the Gold Coast at Cbus, 12 points to 4. And I will say it was a pretty okay game. It wasn't great in terms of that. A lot of ball being dropped in Game 3 for the women. But obviously, 12 points to 4 ended up being Jasmine Peters ended up scoring in the 30th minute for Queensland. Conversion was missed, but Isabel Kelly scored in the 26th minute. So that went up 6 points. Actually, it was 4 all at halftime. Then Jamie Frezard ended up scoring in the 52nd minute, which I thought that she knocked it on, but she hadn't before. As it was going over the line, it wasn't. It was checked, obviously, as well by the bunker. Wasn't. Jesse Southwell ended up scoring the conversion. Ended up scoring a penalty goal in the 48th minute as well. So it ended up being 6 points to 4, obviously very early in the second half. And then obviously ended up being 10 and 12 points to 4 in the second half. And yeah, it was pretty average performance from both clubs in terms of the... we'll have a look at the team stats when it comes to that. Obviously, completion rate, 74% to the Blues, 61% to the Maroons, so not ideal on that front as well. errors 16-11 in the favour of the Maroons. 6 penalties conceded to 4 for obviously the Maroons as well. So not ideal in terms of the women's competition in that. Obviously in NRLW we'll be playing, I believe it starts in July, so we'll be talking about that soon. Fantastic that we got a 3-0 sweep for the women. Obviously ended up attempting to do it last season and obviously lost in the last game and got shut out, which wasn't ideal. I think that was at McDonald's Jones as well, so that final game, so that kind of sucked in that regard, but obviously got the 3-0 wash this time, so it ended up being a blue wash for the women's competition, and that makes it 4 wins out of 4 for the Blues so far. Obviously the under-19s I think will be playing on the Thursday of game 2 for the men's, I believe. So the under-19s will be playing as well. In terms of the completion rate for the men's, it was 74% to the Blues, 78% to the Maroons. Though it was the completion rate was a lot better for the Maroons in the first half against the Blues than it was in the second. They did end up dropping the ball a lot. Kick defusal, that is a huge difference. 67% to the Blues and 40% to the Maroons. And then going down to errors and that, 12 errors to 10 in the favour of New South Wales, 6 penalties to 4 conceded in the favour of the Blues, 5 ruck infringements which went in the favour of the Maroons, one offside call inside 10 metres, obviously in the favour of the Blues, and obviously one of the Maroons, obviously Kane Ponga, getting sent off as well. But it ended up being a decent game, up and down and all over the place in the first game of the men's series. Just things need to be better. We'll say the debutants for both sides, I think, were fantastic. Obviously, Jojo Fafita was in there at wing, and he did relatively well. I think out of most of the debutants, I think he did probably maybe the worst job, but he didn't get a lot of ball as well. He did drop one, I think at least one, very late in the second half, which didn't help, obviously, the Maroons. But ultimately, Ethan Strange stepping up a couple of days before the game, obviously with Mitch Moses going out. Fantastic. I think was ultimately, I personally thought that he was man of the match for the game in general, especially with the amount of prep time that he had. Obviously, Nathan Cleary finally put in a performance. He ended up getting man of the match, which was a bit of a surprise, but I kind of not surprised at that. But ultimately, in game 1, he stepped up when he needed to, because he hasn't actually had to do that a lot when it comes to the New South Wales Blues, especially in games like the deciders before. He's kind of disappeared a little bit, and obviously players like Moses has taken it on, or he was injured obviously last time that obviously New South Wales won, which was obviously in 2022. He was injured during that season around Origin camp. Sorry, am I right on that? No, 23. What am I talking about? I was thinking 22, but no, it was 3 years ago. It was 2023. I'm thinking that I'm back in 2025 again for some reason. But ultimately, Moses has stepped up, Luai has stepped up, a lot of the players that played with him have stepped up. And Ethan Strange, ultimately, I think it went down to, obviously, the 40-20 that was in clutch with the last 15-20 minutes, which led to, obviously, his try in the 75th minute. I feel like that, and a couple of kicking plays, obviously the last play of the game as well, in terms of the last try, with him kicking to Tedesco, that ended up scoring the points drawing try, and obviously with the conversion ended up being the match winning try and conversion attempt. I felt like that put him over. Ethan Strange but I think Ethan Strange, especially even in the first half when the Blues were very much under pressure, he was the one that caused a few breaks and the late end of that first half. So he felt like he was the player that was a little bit dangerous in terms of the game. Casey McLean come on the wing, obviously with Kohler going out, obviously with the head clash, obviously with Kalen Ponga and Kalen Ponga being sent off. Casey McLean come off the bench to go into that role and immediately stepped up. Ultimately there was a huge bomb on his side of the wing, and it was his first touch in Origin football. He jumps over like about 3 or 4 players from both teams, and gets a spectacular bomb defusal catch in the air. It looked fucking fantastic. And then he actually ended up causing one of the breaks that initially broke out for Ethan Strange to get his try. So it was fantastic in that regard. A lot of the, like Sam Walker, ultimately, if there was a player that was man of the match in terms of Queensland, it was definitely him. He stepped up, obviously taking Daly Cherry Evans' spot, and obviously, making it his own, because obviously Sam Walker, obviously with Tom Dearden being out for this Origin series, someone had to step up. Obviously, Sam Walker's done that. I think he's going to be there for the 3-game series. I think that ultimately the way that he performed in Game 1, despite the loss, I think that he was fantastic, arguably one of the better players on the field, including even like a lot of the veteran players that were playing there. Adam Fanua-Blake played relatively well. The forward from Manly, I forget his last name. I can never seem to pronounce it. But he was great as well. There was like I said, Jojo was fantastic in his own right as well. There was a few debutants, and pretty much all of them played good to great to ultimately, when it comes to like Ethan Strange and Sam Walker, playing almost man of the match for both sides. So obviously 22 points to 20 win for the Blues in the men's, and obviously a 12-4 win for the New South Wales Blues women's, the Sky Blues, which ended up scoring 3-0 in the series. So an absolute blue wash there as well. Fantastic results, and obviously we go to Game 2, which is in Melbourne, and then look forward to Game 3 as well in Queensland, and we'll see if we can get 2-1 or 3-0 in terms of the Blues, but hope to God it's not another series loss away from home in the decider again, as we have the last 2 seasons. Hopefully we'll do a lot better this season, but we need to fix up a few things. Obviously, Blake Brayley, ultimately I will mention him as well. He played relatively well. He did play yesterday Friday night, and broke his arm, so he will be out. So we'll see who comes in that playmaking role, because obviously he had a debut that was really good when he come off the bench as well, for Reece Robson. Obviously Reece Robson is still playing well, will be the first starting hooker, but we'll see who we add into the mix as well in that role, and we'll see what happens with that, because it's pretty unfortunate that he got an injury, especially with his arm. So he's at least out for Game 2, possibly could be out for both games, possibly. I'm not sure on the severity of the break, but hopefully he can come back stronger after he recovers from his injury, and hopefully more wishes to obviously him as well. But yeah, 22 points to 20 for the New South Wales Blues men's team, 1-0 up in the series, and a 3-0 wash and sweep for the Sky Blues over the Maroons women team in the State of Origin in the women's competition. And we'll see the NRLW in a few weeks' time. I believe, again, like I said, it's in July, I believe, is when it starts. So we'll be seeing that very, very soon. But yeah, that's Origin and New South Wales. Let's go. All right, now we'll move to the Cubs. Obviously, we'll talk about the series in separate blocks. Obviously, they're playing St. Louis right now. In fact, actually, they are playing right now. They're up 3-1 in the second game. In what was it, the top of the 8th inning? So it's getting close to the end of the game there. But we'll talk about the series separately. Obviously, we've got to talk about the Pittsburgh series, obviously 4 games there in terms of the series there. And then obviously we'll talk about St. Louis when we get there, then the Athletics, and then obviously we'll talk about San Francisco as well when we get to that as well. But obviously we'll talk about Pittsburgh first. And it was a situation where we were going into this, obviously getting swept at home against Milwaukee and obviously against Houston as well, which was not ideal. 8-game losing streak going into it. And the first couple of games were pretty Ended up being 1-1 in terms of going into the bottom of the 7th in terms of runs. And it was a 2-1 loss in the first game in Pittsburgh, which made it 9 losses in a row. Unfortunately, when it comes to pitching in that game, I think it was Ben Brown actually was pitching in that. Yeah, Ben Brown was pitching in that game. Did get, obviously, a run earned against him, but did pitch for 6 innings rather, and got 7 Ks. So got 7 strikeouts. Played relatively well. Again, I think it was a home run in terms of that. No, it was a double, sorry. Was a double to Ian Happ. To the ball going to Ian Happ in the left fielder position. And they scored off that. But apart from that, Ben Brown played relatively well in this game, and obviously getting 1 hit let things it let us down relatively badly. And it's unfortunate. It is one of those situations where I feel like we could have possibly won that game. And then in the next game, we don't want to really talk about that. It was 12 runs to 1. So it was pretty pitiful in terms of hitting. We didn't hit that many. We hit 8. We had 8 hits. We had more people on base, and we only got 1 run in on the second inning. They scored 2 in the first. 3 in the first. Then 5 in the first, and this was off Wicks, who obviously is his first start for the Cubs. Kind of was a bit nervous, I believe. So 5 runs in the bottom of the first. Not an ideal start, I will say. We did end up scoring our only run in the top of the second. Ian Happ ended up scoring a double. And then a lot of things went against us. It got to a situation where it was singles, doubles, walks, from a lot of we got pitching errors, we got homers, a whole bunch of stuff in that game. So it ended up being a 10-game losing streak. So that means that the Cubs, I don't know if they're the first team to do it. They've had 2 10-win streaks and 1 10-game losing streak in the same season before the All-Star break as well. Let's keep that in mind. That's pretty crazy because that's in mid-July. Pretty crazy that we've gotten that. We've gotten 10 wins in a row, gotten 10 losses in a row, gotten 10 wins in a row twice, and lost 10 in a row. Then obviously in the third game, it was 10 runs to 4. Fantastic win to get the monkey off the back. Ian Happ, I think, scored 2 homers, I believe, in this game, if memory serves me right. He singled to the centre fielder, scored 2 in the top of the first. Then Nico scored on a fly ball to make it 3. They did homer and get a 3-run homer in the bottom of the third, so it ended up being 3-all. Then PCAS doubled. Dansby Sorensen scored. Then Pittsburgh homered again in the bottom of the 4th inning. And then we got 2 on base. Ian Happ finally homered and scored 3. Then Conforto scored again, scored 2-run home run to make it 9-4. And then Michael Bush ended up hitting a single. And I believe it was off 1 out or 2 outs at that point in time. There was a pitch that did get overturned in the middle of that. I think round where Michael Conforto was around, I think they had the pitch before home run I think, was overturned from a strike to a ball, and then it was immediately smashed afterwards, or it was in the Michael Bush, and we ended up scoring a run off Michael Bush to make it 10 runs to 4. So it ended up being a huge swing. I believe it was in the 7th inning. Yeah, 6 runs in the top of the 7th inning to make it 10 to 4, and then we won 7 runs to 2 in the last game. So we ended up squaring up, and Ian Happ once again scored a home run eventually in the game. Seiya Suzuki ended up getting a single. So Michael Bush scored. Ian Happ scored a single, and then it was by a throwing error we did score. And Seiya ended up scoring again on a ground out. So we ended up being 3-1. They ended up getting a homer, and then scored a double as well in the bottom of the 6th inning. And then Ian Happ ended up homering in, getting a 2-run home run in the top of the 8th to make it 5-2. Then Amaya ended up walking, so Seiya ended up scoring from a ball that went past the catcher, went behind him, and then PCA ended up getting a call overturned by a manager's challenge when he dived off a single from what was a fielder's choice originally, was called out at home base, and he dived and he slid around the glove, so it ended up being 7-2, and Pittsburgh just didn't have any answers in terms of that. We got that run obviously in the 9th from PCA, so we ended up winning 7 runs to 2. So ultimately in Pittsburgh we got 2 wins and 2 losses, and overall Pittsburgh are only in front of us by 1 game in terms of the season series overall. So fantastic in going into St. Louis, obviously with a couple of wins on the board. Obviously, as I said, the St. Louis series is playing right now. We'll talk about that on Tuesday when they have the day break. We'll talk about obviously what happens with the series. In terms of that, obviously today is the 2nd game when we're recording this, but we'll talk about that when we get to that. But only 2 games from 4, not too bad. Obviously got our hits back because we ended up scoring 17. We scored 19 runs overall in the 4 games in Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh ended up scoring 12, 4 is 16, 18, 20. So they ended up scoring 20, and we scored 19. So they ended up beating us by 1 run at the end of it all in that 4-game series. So kind of makes sense why they're in front of us by 1 game. Obviously losing 2 games to 1. At Wrigley Field against the Pittsburgh Pirates a few weeks ago as well does not help with that. But again, we'll talk about that when we get to that. But overall, I think especially after a 10-game losing streak and having the first 2 games lost, coming back and hitting 17 runs to 6 in the last 2 games, I think was well needed for this team, and hopefully we can get some of the momentum back. Going into the series against St. Louis, and then going back home to play the Athletics after the break, after the day break, and then the San Francisco Giants before another break there on the 9th of June. But yeah, we'll see what happens with that. There's a lot of things going on, obviously, in terms of the Cubs, but we'll talk about the rest of that. But 2 games won, 2 games lost. In the 4-game series at Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh for the overall season has one more win over us than we do. So they are leading the overall season series right now, but obviously we will play them, where do we play them? We play them in Pittsburgh in July, so we might play them for a little while. So we'll play 3 games in Pittsburgh there, and then I think we play 4 games at home. No, 3 games at home at Wrigley Field in September. So we play them in July, and then play them in September as well. So it'd be 6 games left to play against the Pittsburgh Pirates. So we ultimately can, if we win 4 games to 2, in that we'll obviously win the series. If it's 3-3, obviously they'll win it. themselves. Oh, sorry, 4 games to 2 it'll be a draw. So we have to we have to win it. We have to. So it'll be a situation where it's funny because that's 2 wins, and I'm sure that's in front. Like they got 6 games left, and they're in front by 1. 1 back is 5. Then so they'd have to win 1 back and then win. Yeah, they'd have to win 4 games to 2. My math is not working to this morning. I don't know why. But overall, not a bad series in Pittsburgh. Obviously, got the hits back in Game 3 and Game 4, and really, really needed it. So thank God for that. But not ideal when having a 10-game losing streak going in to that 3rd game and 4th game of that series. But I guess things had to turn around, and they did. So can't be too upset with that. But hopefully they can keep on hitting. Alright, second series for the Cubs. Obviously, going to talk about them in piecemeal in terms of series over the next couple of series. Obviously, in the lead up to the end of this video. Obviously, in the miscellaneous stuff, we talked about obviously the 4-game series in Pittsburgh. Obviously, 2 apiece. With the Cubs obviously tying with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Obviously the Pirates, in terms of the overall season series, in terms of the division, are ahead by a game, obviously to us, because obviously they won 2 games to 1 at Wrigley Field. Obviously we won't play them until later on this year. But obviously St. Louis was our next location to go to, obviously against another rival team in the St. Louis Cardinals. Obviously, big grudge between both of these clubs, more so than maybe the Cubs and the Brewers. Obviously, the Cubs and the Brewers have been relatively good the last few years, so obviously their rivalry has picked up quite a bit. But obviously, Chicago and St. Louis have a little bit of history in general, so out of the division, I think the division rivals, this is probably the most personal one out of the teams. So obviously going to go over 3 games. Obviously, we're travelling to St. Louis. The last game finished a couple of hours ago at the time of this recording. Obviously, recording on Monday afternoon, just after the final game. We will have a day break tomorrow when I'm recording this again, before we head back home to Wrigley Field. But obviously, want to talk about obviously the series just as it's just finished, and obviously 3 games in St. Louis for the Cubs against the Cardinals, and it ended up being the Cardinals winning 2 games in the series 2-1 for the Cubs. So we'll go over the results obviously for the games, but unfortunately it's another series lost, especially away from home for the Cubs again, and that means that it's 3 series out of the last 4 that we've lost, because obviously we drew the series with the 4-game series in Pittsburgh, and that's also another loss to add to the mix as well, to break up some wins as well. Obviously a 2-game win streak, obviously going into the first game, which was 6-5 in St. Louis's favour. And obviously Shota was pitching as starting pitcher, and it was not a great time for him. Ultimately, in general, all he got was 2 strikeouts in 5 1/3 innings, and got 5 runs scored against him. So we ended up scoring 3 in the first inning, but obviously gave it straight back at the bottom of the first. We got 1 run in the second. They got a run in the 4th, got a run in the 5th, and they got a run in the 8th, obviously off the reliever, which obviously was Phil Matten at that point in time. Was not ideal. Yes, he got 1 strikeout, but ultimately I feel like Shota was in maybe an innings too long. But yeah, so that run ended up being 6 runs to 4. Obviously got 1 back with PCA ended up getting a homer. Obviously Ian Happ ended up scoring a 3-run home run. Then Nelson Velasquez got called up to the Cardinals team. He responded with a 3-run home run in his own right. Michael Bush ended up getting a single, which scored Dansby Swanson to make it 4-3 Cubs. then Thomas Sagese. I'm not sure if that's how that's pronounced. Saggese. He ended up getting a homer, which made it 4-all. And then in the bottom of the fifth, Herrera ended up hitting a home run as well over left centre field to make it 5-4. And then they ended up getting a single, and Nelson Velasquez got on base and obviously scored off a single to make it 6-4 against obviously Phil Matten. And then Michael Bush grounded out, but PCA ended up scoring to make it 6-5 rather in that game, but obviously struck out at the end of it all in the the top of the ninth inning, since we were travelling away from home. But yeah, not an ideal situation. Ultimately, not much we could do about that in particular. But Shota didn't really play that well. Obviously, again, like I said, 5 runs against him and 2. Ended up getting 2 strikeouts all innings long, or all of his innings, which obviously was a decent amount. Alex Bregman ended up grounding out at the end of the game. But yeah, if I look at the box score, obviously Shota, 5 1/3 innings, 2 strikeouts. That's nowhere near enough. In fact, Roberts come in after him with an inning and 2/3 and end up getting the same amount of strikeouts. So not anywhere close to where it should have been. St. Louis, obviously in the second game, lost 6-1 to the Cubs. The Cubs ended up bringing out some more hits as well. St. Louis did lead in the 4th inning. Ben Brown did, I think it ended up being a single, I believe, in terms of that. It was a single. Obviously, the guy was out at second base, but obviously the throw from Seiya obviously got out and went to the catcher eventually, but obviously they got a run in, which was the only blemish really on Ben Brown's day, because he ended up getting quite a few Ks in all of that. In fact, he pitched for 7 innings and got 6 strikeouts, which is not ideal. It's not a massive amount, but obviously pitching 7 innings, he did really, really well in many regards there. And obviously we got a run in the 5th inning, 2 runs in the 6th, 1 in the 8th, and 2 in the 9th. So that definitely helped us in many forms of fashion. Obviously Michael Bush scored a single with PCA scoring it to make it 1-all in the top of the 5th. Nico Horner singled, which Miguel Amaya ended up scoring, make it 2-1. Michael Bush got out on a sacrifice fly. Dansby ended up scoring to make it 3-1. PCA, with cheers of overrated, ended up hitting a homer, like literally as they were saying it. So basically did the whole bat flip. It was pretty nonchalant, but goddamn, that went a long way. A wild pitch in the top of the 9th, which made Ian Happ score to make it 5, and PCA ended up getting a single, which Seiya Suzuki ended up scoring to make it 6-1 at the end of that game in particular. And then obviously today's game was St. Louis with the win as well, and the hits for Chicago Cubs just disappeared. It was 5 runs to 1, with only 1 notable hit, obviously. Jordan Wicks again was in pitching, and I don't know whether it's because obviously he pitched in his first game of the year, maybe one of his first big league games against the Pittsburgh Pirates, which we ended up also losing when he actually gave up 5 runs in the first inning, the bottom of the first inning, which wasn't ideal at all. He gave up 2 in the bottom of the first. I don't know if it's a situation like he only lasted until a bit through the 3rd inning, because he was only pitching in for 2 innings. So a lot of our bullpen actually had to pick up the slack. In general, obviously Roberts ended up having 2 runs scored against him, but obviously a lot of the setup work was from Jordan Wicks as well. So Roberts pitched 1 inning, Thornton pitched 2, Phil Matten pitched 1, and Rollison ended up pitching the last 2 of the innings. They only got 5 strikeouts all game. Obviously, a lot of balls fly out, and ground outs, fly outs, and all that type of stuff. But 5 strikeouts not ideal. In terms of scoring, it wasn't a great day. I don't know if Jordan Wicks gets nervous. Like a lot of it is a lot of the situation is the warm up, and I don't understand why, because he seems to be giving up. Like this isn't again like the second game in a row where he's given up a couple of really big runs. Obviously 2 today, but then obviously 5 the last time that he was starting to pitch. Again, it feels like he's nervous. Like he hasn't got he's really nervous to pitch at the start because he kind of eased a little bit in the second, and then obviously didn't do well in the third. Ended up getting a walk in the third, but obviously a lot of people on base in the second. But obviously pitched it out and got a couple of outs and strikeouts. But in saying that, it just feels like he's a bit nervous. And I don't know whether it's because that's what's throwing him off in terms of pitching. He probably is not the best pitcher in general in terms of starting either. I don't know if you put him in a situation where when we eventually get our starting pitchers back, because obviously we're supposed to be getting some back soon. But I don't I think Matthew Boyd is starting to pitch again in AAA. Which is obviously the second league, obviously under the MLB. So he's starting to get reps back again and starting to play in a game. So Matthew Boyd won't be too far away, I don't think. But ultimately, I think when he gets called up, obviously Jordan Wicks will probably get called down again. And I don't blame starting pitching, obviously a lot of pitchers, obviously Cade Horton obviously being injured for the rest of the season, Justin Steele obviously re-injured himself as he was recovering, and obviously he's going to be out for a little bit longer. In terms of starting pitching, it's pretty awful all over the place, but I think we just need to work on a lot of things, and obviously through the transfer window in the middle in the summer, which obviously will be relatively soon. I think we need to get at least a starting pitcher on and maybe another batsman in, because we're not getting enough hits as well, especially in the middle order of that. We're talking from batters from 4, maybe even position 3, right down to about 7. I don't know what's going on with this team, but Bregman obviously has only scored a few home runs this year. He hasn't gotten on base that much more than that as well. Ian Happ's obviously been the leader in terms of home runs, but Michael Bush has obviously gotten a bit cold. Nico Horner is obviously getting on base but not scoring, and that's again another thing. Got 7 hits today and leaving people on base again. We're leaving so many people on base, and it's not an ideal situation at all in terms of it's not something that it seems that we'd be doing that all the time, and I don't understand why that is. We're leaving so many people on base, but obviously they scored from a single on the first and to make it 1-0. 1-0, and then obviously a pop out for the second out, scored another run, made it 2 runs to nothing. Then they got a single in the bottom of the third to get it 3. Then a single scored 2 in the bottom of the third as well to make it 5-0. And then Alex Bregman ended up homering in the top of the 6th, but that was the only run that we ended up getting all game long. So 2 games to 1. In St. Louis, obviously not an ideal situation. We do have obviously the day break tomorrow at the time of this recording, but we go home, play a 3-game series against the Athletics, obviously Vegas Athletics. actually, we don't even know what their location is called. Obviously, they're set in Vegas, but yeah, we don't know what the team is actually going to be called anymore, whether it's Vegas Athletics, because I think they said no to that name. But we play the Athletics for 3 games at Wrigley Field before a 3-game series against the San Francisco Giants. Then another day break as well. So we'll talk about that, obviously. Obviously, those 2 games, 3-game series, rather. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up here. But in terms of the division, obviously we're now sitting in fourth spot in the division, because obviously Pittsburgh ended up getting 3 wins in their last couple of starts, and St. Louis obviously got a win. So now we're 5 games back in our division behind Milwaukee. Obviously Milwaukee got a win today. The Astros couldn't get 2 wins out of 3 in their series. It was 2 games to 1 in Milwaukee's favour, so that was not ideal at all. 3 games we've won out of the last 10, so 3-7 record, which is not ideal at all. Same record obviously as St. Louis Cardinals, but yeah, they're half a game in front of us, because obviously they've won 2 games to 1 in St. Louis. Not ideal in the division, and in the wildcard race, we're now sitting at the same amount of games as 6th position, but we are sitting in 8th right now. So obviously, at the moment, the National League is the Atlanta Braves, still on top, 40 wins, 20 losses. They did lose today as well. Second position is the Dodgers, 38 and 21. Then Milwaukee is in 35 and 21. In the third position, fourth position, obviously San Diego, 32 and 26. So they've lost a few games. They're +1 in terms of the wild card games behind. So they're an extra game in of losing their spot. St. Louis are half a game in as well with 31-26, and the Arizona Diamondbacks are in at 31 and 27. Then Pittsburgh obviously is in front of us with 32 and 28, so we've got the same record. Obviously, I'm guessing it's on count back in terms of them winning obviously in the last 10 games, but also obviously the series as well against us. Then obviously the Cincinnati Reds. When we scroll down right now, San Francisco second last in the National League, 8.5 games behind the wildcard spot. We're sitting at the same, obviously, as the Arizona Diamondbacks. Then in the American League right now, it's Tampa Bay still on top, 36 and 20, so 4 games behind the Atlanta Braves. Same amount of losses, just 4 games behind. Cleveland Guardians behind them by 2 games, 2 wins, obviously I should say, 34 and 27. So they've played more games than Tampa Bay. And then in the third position is Seattle Mariners with 31 and 29 right now, with obviously a 6-game winning streak and 8 wins from the past 10 games. Fourth position, obviously, is the Yankees, 7.5 games in their favour in terms of games back of the wildcard spot, so they'd have to lose 8 games to get out of that. 36 and 23 for them, so obviously it's the losses that are hurting them, and obviously the Tampa Bay Rays, I believe, did win the series against the Yankees as well. Fifth position is the Chicago White Sox with 32 and 27 in their favour, and then Toronto Blue Jays 29 and 31 in that sixth position, and then half a game out is the Athletics. So the Athletics are in the 7th position. Obviously we're 8th in our league, followed by the Rangers, also on 28 and 31, then the Orioles, then Minnesota Twins, and then Houston Astros. Red Sox, Angels moved from the bottom, the Royals, and then Detroit Tigers in last. Obviously the Rockies are also in last in the National League, 10 games behind in terms of the wild card race there. But yeah, not ideal for the Cubs, obviously. Yeah, pretty desirable that we need to play a lot better, but obviously playing against the Athletics, obviously in and around the position we're at in the American League, and obviously playing against San Francisco, who's obviously in a bottom position in terms of the wildcard race. But again, in saying that, we did that with the Astros as well. They were second last as well at the time that we played them, and we lost by a sweep. So hoping that's not the case against San Francisco. Obviously, we do play San Francisco. I think we played them twice in 2 series in June, because we play them this coming week. Obviously, 6th, 7th, 8th. And then we play them on the 13th, 14th, 15th, but we play them in San Francisco. So after a trip to Colorado against the Rockies. So pretty crazy in terms of the 3 of the next 4 series. Actually, the 4 of the next 5 series teams actually in our league. Obviously, the Athletics is the only one that is in the American League of the next 5, because then we play the Giants, then obviously the day off, then play the Rockies, then play the Giants again, and then play the Rockies at home at Wrigley Field after that series before the next break, heading into Toronto, which obviously Toronto will be playing in Wrigley Field. So it's going to be a crazy month, because we got them, then we got the Mets for 4 games in New York, then we have Milwaukee in Milwaukee for 3 games ahead. Obviously we're playing Citi Field against the Mets. But then Milwaukee in Milwaukee, and then followed by, obviously, to end the month, obviously technically the 30th of June, and then on the start of July, we play the San Diego Padres at home at Wrigley Field. So going to be a huge couple of series coming up. Obviously, we need to bank as many wins. Hopefully we can get as many sweeps as we can as well, and get some big hits in, because we need that before going into the games against Toronto. The Mets obviously are doing up and down all over the place, mostly down, but obviously against the Brewers late next month. Late this month. And then obviously against the Padres, who are still relatively playing well. And then obviously after that day break, it's a 3-game series in Wrigley Field against the St. Louis Cardinals again. So it won't be long before we play them again for the second series of the division, but we need to be a hell of a lot better. We need to hit a lot more, and our pitching needs to be up. Shota didn't show up in the first game. We got absolutely battered for that. And then Jordan Wicks again kind of shit the bed again. And Ben Brown's been the only pitching highlight of the entire season so far, since obviously Kane Horton got injured, and obviously Justin Steele obviously had a relapse in his recovery, and obviously being out for a little bit longer, which is really weird to say, because Ben Brown costed us a few games in the second half of last season, so it's kind of flipped back around. But he's ended up pitching a lot better, and good on him. Good on him. I will give him credit where credit is due. He's been arguably our best pitcher, both in the bullpen and obviously in terms of starting as well. Obviously in the last few games, he's been fantastic. Has played relatively well. Not too many runs against him, which is great. Obviously, yes, we've had obviously earned hits in terms of singles and doubles. Obviously, in terms of home runs, he hasn't been hit for that many all year long. But hopefully his pitching will continue to improve, and hopefully he can continue on his form as well. But yeah, losing 2-1 to St. Louis in St. Louis, so not an ideal situation for the Cubs. Obviously 4th in the division, and obviously in position number 8 in terms of the wild card race right now, if the season ended, which I think is about where the Mets were at the end of last season. So yeah, not ideal at all. Alright, Cubs again. Obviously Saturday morning. I'm just going to talk about obviously the series with the Athletics. Obviously back home at Wrigley Field. And it was a 2-1 loss, a series loss against the Athletics at home. So that means another loss in terms of the series, and literally we haven't won a series in over a month now. I don't even want to talk about today's game. Obviously, it is Saturday. So we played the first game of the San Francisco Giants series at home. don't really want to talk about it. We'll get to that eventually. But in the first game, it was 2-1 in the first game. Pitching was all right. The problem was, obviously, Jamison ended up putting a home run in the bottom of the third. The top of the third, right in the middle of the plate as well, mind you, on the second pitch. And they did get a single in the top of the fourth, and we didn't score again for the rest of the game, despite having, again, the same issue as we had all season long. Many people on base and not actually scoring. Second game was just as close. In fact, it really, really hurt us. It ended up going to an extra innings as well. The Athletics did end up scoring 2 runs in the top of the 8th. We were ahead 4 runs to 1. And pitching obviously let us down again there in terms of the summary. They scored first, and it was 2 runs up. Saya scored a homer, as well as PCA scoring a 2-run home run, and a Michael Bush triple made it 4-2. And then at the top of the 8th, they scored a homer, a run on a homer, and obviously a tag play that went against us. And then at the top of the 10th, they ended up scoring on a single, and we didn't end up scoring in that game. So we went down 2-0, and then we were looking like it was going to be a sweep because they ended up, the Athletics were ahead by 6 runs to 3 in the bottom of the 7th. In fact, actually, they were ahead 4 runs to nothing midway through the 6th. So, 4 runs very late, many singles, a couple of home runs as well. Obviously, Ian Happing hitting a 2-run home run at the end of it. But, it was not great pitching from Shota in the third game. But, Ian Happ ended up scoring the bottom of the 7th. He scored a 2-run home run, doubled in the bottom of the 9th. Then Big Mo ended up scoring a single, which put Ian Happ in. Dansby Swanson ended up hitting, got a single, and Alcantara ended up scoring, so it made it all 6-6. And then PCA hit a single, which scored Saya in for the last run and made it 7-6. So 3 games down against the Athletics, and it was a 2-1 loss at home. Obviously, with the series going ahead to the Giants in San Francisco starting today, and then obviously getting to more games ahead of time. But it's not been ideal because we haven't won a series in well over a month, and who knows if we're going to continue to do that against the Giants with the result that happened today. But we'll get to that in just a moment. We'll talk about that in just a moment, obviously, with the last part of the miscellaneous section at the end of this video. Obviously, we'll catch up with a whole bunch of other stuff, but we'll talk about the Giants series before this video goes out, lots of things to talk about. Alright, and the last bit of the miscellaneous segment. It's now Tuesday, so when I usually edit these videos, I usually edit yesterday, but obviously the last game for the Cubs was yesterday in the 3-game series against the Giants, San Francisco Giants. I'll get to that in a second. Obviously want to clean up some stuff, obviously in terms of the NRL and the AFL, as well as obviously a lot happening for Liverpool, because obviously we had last week Arne Slot obviously being sacked. We have Iraola finally getting confirmed as head manager. I was going to say head coach, but the manager of Liverpool Football Club. And we also have Divock Origi actually today, this morning, very early this morning. It was midnight my time. Divock Origi has announced his retirement from football. Obviously a huge part of this club previously, obviously under Jurgen Klopp, and obviously one of the big players, obviously one of the big moments for Liverpool in the last few years, obviously getting that corner situation with obviously that night at Anfield against Barcelona. Obviously, the quick corner from Alexander-Arnold. Obviously, the scuffle comes down to Origi. Origi puts it in the back of the net and puts it ahead 4-3. We end up winning their game. So, props to him, obviously, on his retirement. Obviously, he's been a great player for a lot of years. Definitely helped us get some silverware as well. Scored goals like not many others. Obviously, with a unit, obviously, like Firmino obviously being in that unit at the time, and obviously Salah being as dominant as he has been, with a lot of other players chipping in as well. It's been a fantastic ride for him, so props on retirement. Congrats to him, obviously, on a career that he can be proud of. And obviously having Iraola in as the manager of Liverpool, fantastic. We just had to wait for it to get confirmed, but fantastic the fact that Liverpool has managed to do this. Obviously missing out on Xabi Alonso, it's kind of going to hurt a little bit, but the fact that they did go with probably the next best coach, I feel like that was the way to go. Obviously, in my mind, as a crazy thought, maybe I was like, oh, we'll go with Jose Mourinho. Like, why not? Like, it's just a crazy idea. I put that out there as a crazy idea, but obviously that was not going to happen. Obviously, he is most likely confirmed to be Real Madrid's next manager as well. We'll see what happens with that, but obviously there's a lot going on with Real Madrid, and the way that they do things is a little bit different from a lot of other teams and that, so we'll get to that in a moment. With the Titans, obviously we'll go to the NRL with the Titans. They stay in 15th position. Obviously the Bulldogs ended up winning, so they actually jumped from 14th to 13th. Dropping the Broncos to 12th, obviously, with the loss that they had against the Titans, and the Titans stay in 15th position, obviously, with the for and against being better than the Eels. Obviously, the Eels were in front of us. Obviously, we did jump them and did jump the Bulldogs as well. But obviously, since the Bulldogs got the win, we jump just the Eels to 15th position rather than 14th position. So, fantastic from the Titans, obviously, with the win, obviously, over the Broncos. Obviously, as I said, the Broncos were very vulnerable, especially after the loss the week before to the Dragons. And it was one of those things where it was always going to be tough for the Broncos, especially with a few players out. I think, as I said, Pat Carrigan was out. They had a few other players out. Reece Walsh, not sure on how he is, but he could be injured as well. Or it could be an outstanding injury that he hasn't sorted out. But ultimately, he was a bit underdone. Got beaten on a couple of tackles and a couple of obviously the breaking tackle that won obviously the Titans the game from Keanu Kinney as well. So kind of showed him up a little bit. Fantastic to get off the bottom of the ladder and off second last. Obviously big game obviously against the Tigers on Sunday. Obviously the Tigers got belted 68-0 to the Penrith Panthers. Obviously Penrith is still on top of the ladder, 4 points in front of the Warriors. So yeah, it's one of those things where actually, is it 4 points? I swear I'm going to look at the NRL app and not the Titans app, because I swear that the table gets so fucked up. So they're 4 points adrift on top in front of the Warriors. Obviously, the Panthers do have the bye this week coming up. Warriors have got the Sharks, so that's going to be very interesting with that. Obviously, with the teams of Origin Game 2 obviously being announced last night, in the last couple of days, and especially this morning as well. So there's a few players out. The Warriors, I think, have been unscathed a little bit, which is good for them, because they play... When do they play? They play on Saturday. They play on the first game on Saturday. So that's going to be... And especially in Auckland, that's going to be right up there as well. They got They haven't got the team list yet, have they? No, they don't. No, that's later today. But I think they're pretty unscathed. Obviously, for the Titans, yes, the Tigers are coming up. We are underdogs right now. Obviously, the Tigers are favourites at home. But I feel like this is another game that we could win. Obviously, Benji Marshall will have the Tigers back up, obviously, especially after getting beaten 68-0. That's not something you want to take lying down. So obviously the Tigers will play a lot better than they have the last few weeks. They kind of slipped a little bit. But hopefully with the Titans, with the win over the Broncos, obviously with the players that we got out, I think it's only Jojo Fafita and Tino are out for the Titans in terms of Origin again. I don't think Mo or anybody like that has been picked for game 2. Which I think is fair enough. I think that some of the players, obviously Bo Firma, obviously he played last year's series, and he hasn't been up to snuff this year. So obviously him not getting picked is not a really surprise. Mo is the same as well. He hasn't played to his absolute best. AJ, I believe, is in our side still as well. He's not playing as good as he possibly could, but he's there. It's just one of those things, that happens. But ultimately, hopefully the Titans can win against the Tigers, but it is going to be a tough game on Sunday, especially with the travel. We sometimes do travel to Sydney, and we don't always have the best record when it comes to games in and around the Sydney area. But we do win sometimes, and hopefully we can get another win on the board for us. But it's going to be a tough game regardless. But this is a game that we possibly could win out of the draw that we have with the teams obviously that are left in the competition. This is one of the games that we can possibly really win in this situation, because obviously we've got the Tigers, and ultimately I'm just going to get the draw from the NRL app. We've got the Tigers, and then obviously we've got the Panthers the week after at home, then the Bulldogs, and then we have the bye, which leads into the game against the Storm, and I believe that game is after Game 3, I think. When is Game 3? Because it is in July, the 8th, so yeah, it's the weekend after. So we have the bye leading into Game 3, and then it'll be the week after that. It'll be the Saturday after that against the Storm, which would have liked it the week before. Would have liked it the week of, the weekend of, because then obviously Munster would be out. There'd be a few players out for the Storm. But yeah, that's one of the things that can't do much about. Obviously they got to decide on what teams play where, and obviously that'll be our last bye of the season. So yeah, and then after that, obviously we got Manly at home, then the Dragons at Jubilee, then the Warriors at home, Cowboys at home, Knights at Newcastle, then the Sharks, the Rabbitohs, and the Dolphins at home. So yeah, a lot of those teams obviously that I've named off, a lot of those in around the mix of the top 8. Obviously the Dragons are obviously the one that's outside it. Storm is as well, but obviously they're moving up in the table as well. Bulldogs will be hanging around near that bottom group. They'll try and get into the top 8 as well when we play them. But yeah, the Tigers look a little bit vulnerable. Hopefully we can pick up a win over them, but it's going to be tough. In terms of the AFL, the Giants are still sitting in 10th despite obviously the bye. Obviously with the byes in the AFL, they do not get any points for any of the byes. So Richmond stay off the bottom of the ladder. Obviously Essendon lost to Carlton despite being ahead for a lot of that game. They kind of did bottle it in the last quarter. So Richmond stay in second last. The Giants stay in 10th, with Collingwood going down by 8 points to Melbourne yesterday in the big freeze game. Obviously, Melbourne playing really much for Neil Danaher, and obviously they kept their fight up. So realistically, in terms of the table, the big slide was the Suns. They dropped, obviously, after losing the Q Clash to Brisbane. They dropped from 5th position, actually even in 4th position, right down to 7th position. So they're outside the top 6 right now, with obviously wins to Melbourne and to the Western Bulldogs. Obviously Adelaide also got a win as well, but obviously their percentage is worse than the Suns. And obviously Brisbane joined that group on 28 points in 7th, 8th and 9th, whereas the Giants are on 24 in 10th position. So they're a win behind those 3 teams, but obviously half a game in front in the top 10, obviously with Collingwood being the team that's got the draw, obviously with the 2 points against Hawthorn, sitting in 11th position. Obviously St Kilda could have won against the Swans, but they bottled it as well. They really did bottle it because they were ahead for the majority of that game. Obviously Sydney did lead at the start. They did pop on in front of them a couple of times, but the Saints did peak really far ahead, and they got beaten by a couple of points at the end of it all. And I don't understand how they did, but they did. Swans just find a way to win, and it's not going to be ideal. Obviously, there's a few teams that are going to be out for this week's bye. In fact, I will actually bring it up now, and actually who is going to be off this week. The Swans is definitely one of them. I know that for sure. Going to round 14. Scroll down to the bottom. Oh, no, the Swans do play this week. So it is Carlton, Collingwood, the Dockers, and the Hawks out this week. So with that, Sydney will probably go to the top because they do play Port Adelaide in the Adelaide Oval, which isn't necessarily a place that they do win a lot, but obviously with how Port Adelaide are playing, they did beat West Coast, obviously, but it wasn't very convincing by anything. I think that West Coast kind of actually shot themselves in the foot a lot towards the end of that game, which kind of costed them the win. The Swans should beat Port Adelaide with the way that they're playing, and obviously go back up to the top of the table. And then obviously I think round 15, I think they have the bye. Yeah, they have the bye in round 15, so they have it the week after. So Essendon could pop back up again. Obviously playing the Cats on the Thursday after that. So they do have an extended break, which could be good for Fremantle. Could be bad as well. But ultimately for the Giants, obviously last bye of the season for them. Obviously we play the Saints in Melbourne on Sunday before we head back home on Saturday against Carlton, which hopefully I'm going to go there and obviously sort out some stuff with the games there, and obviously the other events that are happening around that time. Ultimately, we get to the Cubs now. So obviously we've got the last series of the week, and obviously of the fortnight. Obviously against the San Francisco Giants. Now, ultimately, the Giants at this point are in second last in terms of the National League, so we'll put that in perspective on where the Cubs are. They were in 8th position, 8th or 9th in the wildcard race. Obviously, San Francisco Giants are second last, to put that in perspective. And it was a series loss, again, for the Cubs, 2-1. So again, for well over a month now, the Cubs have lost every single series in the last month, including obviously 2 to some of the last place teams in both the National League in the Giants, and obviously the American League, which at that point was the Astros. It's pretty pitiful. So, and especially the game that I didn't want to talk about when I was talking about, obviously, the series previously against the Athletics. I didn't want to talk about the first game because it was the Giants won 18 runs to 3. We eventually just gave up, and in fact, so many home runs were hit in this game in particular, and it got down to a situation where even fucking, I think it was Carson Kelly, I think, pitched at the end for the Cubs, which was crazy. Carson Kelly pitched in innings, and obviously 7 home runs. Yes, 7 home runs in the game. 3 off Cabrera. I can't remember if some of those were multiples. I think a lot of them were. 1 off Milner, 1 off Roberts, and 2 off Carson Kelly, obviously, when they pitched him in. Obviously, he's not a traditional pitcher, so obviously that was, a situation. It was a 2-run home run on the first one, grand slam on the second, home run in the top of the fourth, which made it 6. 2 off the next one, which made it 8, so that was 6 runs in the top of the fourth inning. Then they got a sacrifice fly, made it 9 in the top of the fifth, top of the sixth. They doubled to get 1 run in the 10th. Then sacrifice fly on the same inning to get 11, then homer to get 13, and then it was a 3-run home run, which made it 16-0 before they even answered. Carson Kelly got a single. Seiya Suzuki ended up scoring in the bottom of the 6th, which made it 16-1. Bottom of the 8th, Seiya ended up home running, which made it 16-2, and then Amaya ended up hitting a double, which scored Pedro Ramirez to make it 16-3. Then in the top of the 9th, they homered again, and then homered again to make it 18-3 final score. So that was pretty embarrassing in terms of a result. And yeah, it was a couple of losses on the trot at that point in time. Then we did end up getting a win in the second game. It went to extra innings, and it was 3 runs to 2. So San Francisco scored 1 in the top of the 6th. We scored 1 in the bottom of the 6th. They scored in the top of the 9th. We scored in the bottom of the 9th, which both times. So it was a home run in the top of the 6th. Then PCA in the bottom of the 6th scored a homer. They scored off a sacrifice fly in the top of the 9th. And I was very nervous. I'm like, here we go again. We're going to lose another close game. PCA, next inning, just went bang, straight down right field. Hit another home run, scored the second, tied it up at 2. Very strong innings in the top of the 10th to keep them scoreless. And then Michael Bush ended up scoring. And I think it was 2 outs at that point as well. So Dansby Swanson ended up scoring. Quite a few players, obviously, in that last sequence actually hit a few as well, especially with being down 2 outs at that point in time. So that was top of the bottom of the 6th. I'm going to find the 9th. No, it doesn't say. I'm going to have to go through all the list, but just remind me. No, they just yeah. So they put Dansby Swanson in as the pinch runner, and Michael Bush hit a single. But yeah, it was quite a ways back, obviously in that game, and then we lost in extra innings as well yesterday in the top of the 10th, 2-1 as well. So they scored initially in the start of the first, with Talion giving an earned run. Thankfully, it wasn't a home run from him, but he did go out with an injury. It was a hamstring injury, so he is out for a while. So obviously, Assad ended up coming in and actually pitched really, really well for I think it was his first game back. So great to see that. Yeah, they scored off a single. Then Big Mo ended up scoring a single. And Carson Kelly gone in. PCA was on third, and in fact, in saying that, PCA was on third in the bottom of the 10th as well to get the scoring run, to score the tying run in the bottom of the 10th, and both Michael Bush and Alex Bregman especially popped out to shortstop, basically the same shot from both players to go from one out to all out, and leaving PCA stuck on third base, which is great in that game. And I was so pissed yesterday with that happening, especially when it just happened just before I started work. So that was lovely. But obviously going ahead, obviously away from home, the next couple of series, with obviously down in Colorado to play the Rockies in 3 games, and then playing in San Francisco for 3 games before obviously the Colorado Rockies come back to Wrigley Field for 3 games as well, before a break on the Friday after. So it's very important that we win at least the next 2 of the 3 series. In fact, realistically, it's important to win all 3 series. Hopefully we can get into a situation where if we get into a sweep, I would love a sweep right now, but I am not expecting it with the way that the Cubs are playing. They just can't hit, and they're even losing close games now, which ultimately they were in a situation where they were winning some blowout games, and obviously with the series against the Reds, they got 3 walk-offs back to back. And, you know, you got to win close games as well as obviously blow out some teams. But, like, honest to God, I don't understand where the slide. We're really sliding right now, and I don't understand why this team is. And they're in a situation where right now, in their National League, obviously there's a few games playing today. I think the Brewers are still playing today as well. They have a game at 12:05 p.m. my time, so they still got to play out a game in their series as well. And the Reds play the Padres at 11:40 when I'm recording this, so they got to play today as well. But the Chicago Cubs are 7.5 games behind in the division in the fourth spot. Obviously, the Reds, if they win against the Padres today, will move 1 game back up behind the Cubs, which will make it 1 game behind the Cubs in the bottom spot. And then Chicago are back into 9th position now in the wildcard race, with obviously the Padres actually dropping out and the Phillies actually jumping in their division, because obviously they've gotten a few wins back. They're in the 5th position now in terms of the National League wildcards. Obviously, it's Atlanta still on top, the Dodgers in 2nd, Milwaukee Brewers in 3rd, St. Louis Cardinals in 4th, Philadelphia, the Phillies in 5th, and obviously the Diamondbacks are in 6th position. Obviously, it's at San Diego, half a game. I don't know how we're still half a game outside of the wildcard spots. Obviously, we're behind Pittsburgh and San Diego right now. But yeah, I'm surprised that we're still only half a game out, with the Washington Nationals being a game and a half out. And with obviously the 2-1 series win, San Francisco Giants are now 7.5 games behind in the wildcard race. The American League, Tampa Bay Rays still on top, Cleveland Guardians in 2nd. Behind them, same amount of wins, just not as many losses for Tampa Bay. Obviously, they did actually lose 2 games to 1 in the rivalry series in Florida, obviously against Miami. And then Seattle Mariners in 3rd, with the Yankees in 4th, White Sox in 5th, and the Texas Rangers was going to say the Texas Rangers in 6th position with Toronto being half a game out, but I think that Toronto do play today. Yeah, they're playing right now, and they're behind 5-1 against the Phillies in the top of the 5th at the time I'm recording. So they're behind at this point in time. Could be a game behind the Rangers, and then the Athletics after them, and then the Orioles with obviously the LA Angels obviously picking up a win yesterday against the Dodgers, losing 2-1 in that series. They're behind by 7.5 games as well. So, but the Rockies 10.5 games behind in the wild card. I just hope to God that we can win against the Rockies, because god damn, if we don't win both series against the Rockies, we're definitely in trouble, and we're probably not even going to make the postseason at this point, unless they have a huge run after the All-Star game. And I don't know whether it's a situation where they don't want to play in the All-Star game or not, because obviously that was the situation last year. Obviously the All-Star game played, and then our record went from like top in front by a lot of games to really dropping out and dropping into the wildcard spots. But it was not ideal at all in the way that they're playing. But hopefully we can get a run back in. But it's one of those things where I feel like Craig Counsell as manager has kind of lost the players a little bit too. Obviously, yes, we've had injuries to our starting pitchers as well. And it has not been ideal. Obviously, we're getting some of them back coming up. Obviously, I think Matthew Boyd's on the way. I don't know whether he'll be playing in that, especially in that first game against the Colorado Rockies. He might be. He might be available from that. But obviously, at this point in time, Colin Rea is pitching tomorrow. When I'm recording this, obviously this will go up around when the game is just about to start, my time. But obviously Matthew Boyd's on the way back, so he'll be back in the rotation in terms of starting pitchers, and obviously Assad is back as well to back up, and we'll see what happens, because ultimately he could come in as a sub like he did with the game against in yesterday's game, where Talion obviously did go out on injury, but obviously he subbed straight in and went in for 6 or 7 innings, I believe he pitched. So let me have a look. 6 1/3 innings and got 5 strikeouts. So like, that's pretty good. I don't think, obviously, it's not the best in terms of result, but ultimately I feel like he can be a backup if need be, if our starting pitcher, say like a Jordan Wicks, for example, or Colin Rea doesn't do great to start, or Shota, for example. If they don't do well, and obviously he's not backing up crazily, obviously he can act as a bullpen pitcher, which would be great in that regard as well, if he doesn't have to pitch to start. Obviously, probably won't play, I would imagine, tomorrow. I think Assad would probably be unavailable. He might be in the bullpen to maybe pitch an inning, but only if we need it. But I think definitely probably in the game, in the second game, if not especially the third game, which I think Shota is pitching in the second game, which is not ideal. But we'll see what happens with it all. I'm not sure on how we're going to go, but who knows at this point. Actually, it could be Cabrera and Shota being in the third game. I can't remember which way it goes, but hopefully we can get a series win against the Rockies. I would love a sweep, but I'm not holding my hope for one, because I'll be disappointed again. So it was almost basically a perfect fortnight, with the Giants winning against Melbourne, and obviously the Titans winning, especially against the Broncos. It's just the Cubs just kind of shit the bed, and they've only won like 2 or 3, maybe even 4 games in the last like fortnight and a half. So I don't know. But with all that said, thank you guys so much for watching this episode of How's My Team. I apologise for it being lengthy, because it probably is going to be lengthy with how much I've talked over the last fortnight, and especially with obviously not an episode last week. It's funny, I take a week off last week don't put a video up, and everything happens. You know, Arne Slot gets sacked. Iraola is in the mix. You know, we've got we've got players transferring from one team to another. Obviously, Andy Robertson, obviously, it's most likely gotten Tottenham. I don't think they've actually confirmed it yet, but it's most likely going to happen. And then obviously Origi, obviously this morning, retiring from football. There's a lot going on, and it's crazy. So with all that said, thank you guys so much for watching this episode of How's My Team. We should be back to normal next week. So we'll talk about all of that. Obviously, we'll talk about the Titans, obviously against the Tigers. We'll talk about the Giants, obviously against the Saints. We'll talk about the Cubs, obviously. And then obviously in the lead up to Origin Game 2, which will be the Wednesday after. But we'll talk about that when we talk about that. But with all that said, thank you guys so much for watching this episode of How's My Team. This has been Brian Man 100. You guys have a great day or night. And of course, take care.